Hi, everyone. I'm Bryan Ramirez with CFAR. That's contract for, and we're here tonight with Bryan Witt, who's running in the 27th district here in California for the House of Representatives. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, Bryan.
Well, thank you very much, Bryan and Kelly, for inviting me to speak with you. I really appreciate this opportunity and appreciate the support that you have provided for me out on Twitter. I've seen quite a lot of those tweets, so that's really nice to get that kind of support, especially when the Democratic Party is basically ignoring me, as is the local and national news media. You would think that they would be interested in another Democrat running against an incumbent Democrat, but I think it's very telling that the level of silence is exactly fits right into their game plan of ignoring renegade candidates like myself until I become a threat, or if I become a threat, and then at which time they'll become outwardly hostile and do everything they can to try to derail my candidacy. I'm running not necessarily a campaign against Judy Chu. I'm sure she's a very nice lady, but I feel like she's a little too comfortable with politics as usual. And she's accepting money, that's just one of the main contentions that I have with her. She's accepting money from the very people who are undermining our democratic system. And I think that the leadership of the Democratic Party, what I call the failed leadership of the Democratic Party, is doing everything they can to support the interests of more multinational corporations. They've done this repeatedly over the last 40 years. And I think that progressives like us are interested in finding candidates who are going to speak up against the sacred cows in our system, the sacred cows like Israel and Saudi Arabia and the banking system and Wall Street, the real estate market. Judy accepts millions of dollars over the course of her career from the real estate industry. We have a housing crisis here in California where tens of millions of people cannot afford to live in a decent place. My mom and dad bought a very nice home in Pasadena in 1964 for about $35,000, and my dad made $500 a month. And my mom worked at Sears Roebuck in the personnel department. So they were just very middle-class people, and they bought what we would consider a very middle-class home. Right. When my parents passed away just recently, that house sold for over $900,000. And it's just not at all sustainable or possible for most people like me. I'm a railroad operations supervisor, make a great income, but that house is now out of reach for somebody like me. So I'm running a campaign, as I said, not necessarily against Judy Chu, but against the corrupt establishment of Democratic politics. And we saw this in the 2016 election, with how Bernie Sanders was railroaded out of office by a rigged primary. And those of us who were big Bernie supporters have not forgotten. We're not going away, and that's why I'm here, along with Tim Canova and Steve Jaffe and others who are running against the political status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually got into a Twitter discussion, we'll call it, with some people the other day, and someone said, we've got to put this whole Bernie Hillary thing behind us, or we are going to lose again. And I said, here's the problem. No, it's not Bernie versus Hillary anymore, or Hillary versus Bernie, but just insert, this establishment candidate versus the progressives like yourself, like you said, that are being ignored by the media. All you have to do is put them in their places. Was it Jason Crow, the story in Colorado, Jason Crow and Levi Tillman, I believe? Like, all you have to do is change out the names, and it's the same thing again, all over again. And that's why we're still talking about it. It's not Bernie versus Hillary, but it seems to be the corporate Dems versus the people who really want to get in there and change things and represent the people. And it's interesting you brought up that about your parents' house, because I heard Tim Canova say a similar thing. And, it is, we're just wanting we need another New Deal, like just middle class life. And Lisa McCormick, another candidate, her husband was saying the same thing. We just want it to be affordable for middle class working people, to bring things back down to some level of sanity. A house that's $900,000 is, not touchable for most middle class people. So what would you attribute that to? I know in California, the real estate the bubble was so big, the prices just never really came back down to a normal level, I guess.
Well,
Is that
this starts at the very top, and we have to address these issues from the very top from a policy standpoint. The Federal Reserve sets interest rates, and when they set interest rates so low and they make it so easy for people to get second mortgages on their homes, to do home improvements, what happens is, well, let me just digress for a second. My mom and dad bought their house in '64. They didn't do any home improvements on that house until the '80s. And that's because the people of their generation paid cash for everything. And so when we make credit so easy, it's wonderful for all of us. We love getting this stuff, what we want right now, but that bids the prices up on these houses. Every house that you see on the multiple listing service almost every house is completely tricked out and ready to go for sale. And that means people have gotten a second mortgage on that house. They've done all the home improvements, completely redone the electrical, put in central air and heating, redone the insulation, the plumbing, everything. So it's all set. So you can't find a house at a good deal because the mortgage banking industry, the regular banks, the real estate agents, the escrow companies, they all benefit massively from the increasing prices of real estate. And then like we have here in City Council with Pasadena, they just basically rubber stamp all of these development projects. They give a few of these, what do they call them, credits for affordable housing. So a few units are made available for affordable housing. And I'm opposed to that as well because it's just a Band-Aid on the problem. And what they're doing is they're creating like a selective equality of outcome. I might like to live in one of those $700,000 condos, but I don't fit into the matrix with the lower income level. So even though I don't have a huge income, somebody that makes quite a lot less than me will be able to get one of those lower income housing units, but I wouldn't. So I feel like it's very undemocratic, and it's a Band-Aid on a solution that needs to be addressed from the top. So we have to get a monetary policy in our country that works for all of the people and not for a select industry. I try not to get into this issue too much because a lot of people get confused by it, but our monetary system was designed 100 years ago at Jekyll Island by a group of bankers who decided that we're going to give the banking industry an exclusive monopoly to print up our money and then charge us interest on it. When we, as a sovereign government, could print up our own currency interest-free. And what they've done is successfully transferred that system to all the governments around the world. It goes through the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland, I believe. And they're all basically on the same system where we all, the governments issue bonds, and then the people pay interest on those bonds. And this is the reason why we have taxes, income taxes. We wouldn't need income taxes on probably 80% of our population if we were to do away with that system. Abraham Lincoln, by the way, printed up greenbacks, as you might remember, during the Civil War. They needed $450 million, and Lincoln didn't want to pay the usurious interest on that, so they printed up their own currency. That particular regime had problems itself, but what I'm trying to say is that has been proven to work in the past. One thing I'll leave you with on that real quick, so we don't belabor this, is that Henry Ford said years ago, if the people of the United States truly understood our banking and monetary system, there would be a revolution before the morning. It's a complete rip-off to the American people, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars a year that we pay to as a subsidy to the banking industry. But the mainstream media will never bring this up, nor will candidates like Judy Chu, because she's a beneficiary of this corrupt system that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, oh, go ahead, Bryan.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question about foreign policy. Your strongest point in your platform. What do you think of Trump's current position to pull out of the agreement with Iran?
Well, he is really a very difficult president to get a handle on. There's some things that I don't support him. I don't particularly like a lot of the things that he said. A lot of the things he says I think are sort of indirectly racist. I'm not sure if he actually means it that way or if he's doing it intentionally to appeal to this, base that he seems to have.
Right.
But I kind of agreed with some of what he said was that it was a terrible deal to begin with, and I'm okay with him saying that and asserting that. But I think that Mr. Macron, who went over there from France, sorry if I got this wrong, he's the prime minister or the president. But regardless, I think what he was suggesting, well, why don't we give them a better deal than what they already did? And that's what I would suggest is,
right.
Well, let's find a way to give them a better deal. Why do we have to make the terms so harsh? We have people like John Bolton who will never forget the hostage crisis, of the 70s. I mean, this was 40 years ago. It's time to drop that. People forget that the United States overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran in support of, the British petroleum interests. Mm-hmm. And so they have a lot of animosity. And so, although I don't know that we as a people are collectively responsible for that, maybe we are, and we have to find a way to make that right to the Iranian people. They're the most stable government in Western Asia, and we need to do everything we can to be friendly with them. And what I think this really is about is protecting the interests of Israel, who for some reason feels as though Iran is a threat. I don't know all of the complexities of that issue. There may be some truth to it, but the truth always lies somewhere in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that we need to I would prefer that we take a middle ground on this. I'm not sure what's happened to all the money that was held from the Iranians, but I think we should give it all back to them. And I think that we should also just completely eliminate the sanctions and try to work through diplomacy and cooperation and say, hey, we'd like to work with you guys. Please, if you are doing anything that has been in support of terrorism, please cool it on this. If we find out that you're involved in this, we're going to hit you, and we're going to hit you very hard. But what I think is what they're doing is they're protecting their interests, and the United States is not necessarily protecting the interests of our people. They're protecting the interests of multinational oil companies. And I think that's not a good basis for us to do foreign policy on. It has to be on a basis of supporting human rights and doing what's fair and doing what's right for the people of our country and the people of the planet. We have to, I want our best export to be a good example.
That would be wonderful. So you are a former Marine, is that right?
I am. I served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps. I was an infantry squad leader. I served at a special weapons facility. I have to be careful what I say about this, but weapons facility in southern England for a year and a half. I went back to the Fleet Marine Force and served in Okinawa for 6 months. Went to Honduras during the days of Ollie North's crack cocaine operation down there. Not something I'm terribly proud of, but the military forces oftentimes get caught up in activities that are not of our own doing. We do the bidding of the President of the United States, whoever is the incumbent. And so I'm a big supporter of our military. I'm not always in support of the actions that our government takes with our military, though.
Yeah, Oliver North is back in the news now. I happen to notice. So he is going to be NRA's new president. Is
Oh
that
my
right?
gosh. Well, okay.
That makes
uh,
sense.
it does make sense. He would be probably a perfect candidate for that job. I dropped my membership in the NRA. I'm a supporter of Second Amendment rights. I think that we have to allow people to own a firearm, but I really don't see why anybody needs more than a pump-action shotgun or a Colt
Mm-hmm.
45, automatic pistol to defend their home. I don't see why we need all these military-grade weapons floating around in our system. However, I should add, I'm not completely opposed to that. I think that the gun issue is actually a symptom of a larger problem in our society, in that we have a huge amount of untreated mental illness in our country.
Yes.
Right here in California, I think it was in 1967, they passed the Lanterman-Petris Short Act, which gives people who have severe mental illness the right to decline treatment. And if they don't think that they're mentally ill, they can just say, well, you can't hold me here any longer. That's their right to do that. Years ago, you could be involuntarily committed, and until they felt like you were ready to be released into the population. Now, Ken Casey wrote, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's one of the great movies of our generation.
Mm-hmm.
He exposed some of the horrible
Right.
actions that were taken against mentally ill people in these institutions in New York State. Life magazine did an expose in the late 50s on the deplorable conditions that existed within those institutions. And so this led to a series of lawsuits by good-intentioned lawyers who wanted to help these people have good treatment, but it led to a disaster for our society. I work at Union Station in downtown Los Angeles, and you can just take a drive down 6th Street east from Alameda, and you'll see thousands of people who have severe mental illness who are living out on the streets. And it's a disgrace to our society that we can't do better than this. We need to find a way to get these people housed. Some of them need permanent treatment in a psychiatric hospital and should probably never be released. But they definitely need to have a place to go. There's about 33%, this is the statistics that I've seen, of people who are out on the streets have severe mental illness. And of that 33%, about 44% of those people are violent and have been proven to be violent. And so this is not anything about criminalizing mental illness. It's about taking care of them and getting them the treatment that they need.
Right.
So the whole gun issue is, we have a society who's terrified because we have what looks to be all these predators on our streets, and our government doesn't seem to be doing much about it. So we have people who want to arm themselves, and so I want to balance that right of that we have with the Second Amendment against the rights, or with the rights of those in the community who want to be safe from somebody doing some terrible act like happened in Las Vegas or just recently at the school in Florida.
Right. It's the gun issue is like so many issues. There is common ground, and it almost seems like, both sides just sort of capitalize on there not being solutions found. And it's really frustrating to listen to because people are either seem to be on one side or the other, and if you say it's mental illness needs to be looked at, then people say you're on the wrong side of it, or if you say it's just about the guns, you're on the wrong. And they're when you poll regular Americans, they pretty much are in agreement about reforms that could be done to fix things. Closing the gun show loophole, and tightening up background checks and that sort of thing. The one thing that did surprise me in a recent poll was that fewer people than I thought on the right were against or were for banning the assault rifles. I think it was like in the 40 something percent. So that surprised me a little bit.
That's good.
But it's, yeah, I mean, but everything else, we're in a lot more agreement than we realize, and it's such a polarized issue. But I always think of, I have to borrow David Letterman's line about the assault rifles. Like, unless you've got, you know, Bigfoot at your bird feeder, you know, why do you need this in your daily life? So, yeah, I mean,
I mentioned this on a Facebook post a while back, and I said that the day that I need an AR-15 to defend my one-bedroom apartment, I'm getting the hell out of
here. Yeah, exactly. But it is, I mean, I think it also just shows how, you know, it is also an urban versus rural debate too, because, I mean, I personally don't hunt. But I'm in North Carolina, you know, in a city, but I know there are plenty of people in the rural areas that do, and they want to have their rights to own a weapon. We need to look at everything. We need to look at mental illness. We need to look at closing the loopholes. And I think another thing that we do need to look at is the violence in media. And that's something I find as a progressive myself a lot, and a parent. A lot of people on the left don't really want to hear that. And I think that it does, you know, if you're watching Call of Duty from the time you're a toddler, it might have an effect on you. I'm not saying it on everyone, but I think as a whole, you know, we're watching more and more violent everything, movies, video games, everything. And I think it does have an effect. So
yeah, I totally agree. I think people become paranoid just partly because of watching all this various media. I mean, I've been a police officer, and oftentimes, I mean, some cops would probably not like me saying this, but I used to leave the gun and badge at home. I'm like, I'm going out for drinks tonight. I'm not a cop tonight. You know, I didn't feel the need to have that with me. And for some people, it's sort of a security blanket, and it gives them a feeling of, I don't know, power or whatever. I just don't personally care. If I feel like I'm threatened or I'm going into a really dangerous area, then as a cop, yeah, I might take that precaution. But oftentimes I thought, oh, okay, I don't need to carry this with me tonight. This is something I'm not doing. If I see something, I'll report, you know, what I've seen, but I'm not going to get involved. But I think, and also for the average citizen, I think I'm kind of actually in support of, if you have a pretty good reason, you should be able to carry a concealed weapon. However, I feel for most people it's a liability. Even for myself, I have a lot of training with firearms. I'd prefer actually not to have a weapon with me because I just don't want that extra liability. There are times when I walk through Union Station at night and there's no police there, and I sort of wish that I had a weapon on me. But for the most part, I just don't think I need it. I can call 911 if I really feel like there's a threat. Most of the threats that exist are in your mind, and I just wish that people would be a little bit more, you know, easygoing and not be so quick to buy into the hype that, oh, some other might break into my house and try to hurt me. I've lived here in Pasadena for over 45 years of my life. No one's ever broken into my house. Of course, I don't live in a high crime area, which that changes the dynamics as well. But, you know, even if you do live in a high crime area, there's a lot of people who don't own firearms who don't feel the need to have something like that. However, I just want to keep going back to the point, we just have to balance it between your right to own a firearm and what makes sense. As you mentioned, let's close this gun show loophole. Let's tighten up the background checks. Maybe let's think about the military grade weapons. We really need those. If we want to have a militia, fine. If you want to be in the militia, then, you know, join the National Guard and keep your AR-15 in the armory.
Right.
Yeah. So, to some other items that are on the contract for American Renewal, are there any that were in particular, like, that you're most passionate about, or that you think people in your district care more about than others? Or I guess you signed on for everything, but what topics are most important?
The main thing for me is getting money out of politics. You know, I've made that pledge that I won't accept money from corporations, from PACs, from super PACs. I won't take it. If they won't send me money anyways, but if they did, I'll send it back. So far, all I've taken is small donations from individual donors. And I think this is the very insidious thing about our system is that with the Citizens United, especially, we created a very corrupt system that's based on who has the most money. And when I ran for city council, again, it was the same thing. Whoever had the most money were the candidates that got into the runoff. A lot of people told me they thought I was the most interesting candidate, but the other two candidates who actually spent over $200,000 apiece, they got for a city council race, for crying out loud. They were the ones who got all the attention. And what I would really like to see is a system where we have publicly financed elections, where you meet some kind of a threshold. There's people who are smarter than me that can figure this out, but you meet some sort of minimum threshold and you get a certain amount of money, and then you go to the rank-based voting, which I think seems very fair way to do this at the end of the line. And let's just get the money out of it. Even my own union won't even talk to me. They're not interested, which I think is really disheartening, because Amtrak is a union organization, and if they were to get behind me and help me for the first time in 40 years, we'd have one of our own people would have a seat at the table, and they won't talk to me. So I really think we need to get the money out of the political spectrum. I think that's corrupting our system, and I'm hoping it's not too late, but I don't think it is. I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think our institutions are actually still strong. It's just the people who lead these institutions, the top people of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, these are the ones who are sort of corrupting this process. And if enough people like me and others will run, we might be able to chase some of these people out of office and maybe make a huge difference.
Have you heard of the Anti-Corruption Act?
No, tell me. I'm very interested, though. It sounds like something I would support.
Yes, so it's anticorruptionact.org, and I believe it was created by Represent Us, but it's all about getting money out of politics. And I agree. I mean, we can have all these great candidates, but we're fighting against a corrupt system, and it tends to eat candidates. If you can even, as you said, you're not getting news coverage, and if you do become a threat, then they'll attack you. But yeah, I think we have to change the whole system. We've also got issues with election integrity, which I'm sure you're probably aware of. Again, Tim Canova's case is a good example. I'm for one, am thrilled that he decided to run as an independent. And I usually will ask a candidate if they've considered doing that. It's because it's just so disheartening. We hear over and over again the same kind of setup where the DCCC has come in and either just tried to thwart the progressive candidate from winning, or either ignored them or gone against them. So I always kind of ask that, is that something you've ever considered as running as an independent, or?
Sure, yeah, I would actually entertain that idea. I haven't ruled that out. I started out wanting to actually run as an independent because I do have kind of a conservative worldview, having been a former Marine, a former police officer. I do look at the world through a more conservative lens. I am a person who is a very big proponent of universal public services for all of our citizens. And I think that's the heart of progressivism, is universal public services, as they have in Scandinavia. I would really like to see us have a social democracy like they have in Western Europe and in all the countries in Scandinavia. I wouldn't go as far as saying I'm a socialist, because if you look at what pure socialism is, that's what they have in Venezuela, which is just a failed system. But a social democracy, as they have in Germany, they have very strong public services, very strong unions. They have good, strong capitalist sector where they allow businesses to make money, but it's also highly regulated. And I think that's what we need here. And that's why I feel like I'm really kind of more of an independent than a Democrat. However, I think the way to do that is through, at least for me, for this particular moment in time, is through the Democratic Party. Because if I were to run as an independent, a lot of people would not really quite understand where I'm coming from. And so you have to educate everyone all over again. And for somebody who's already facing an uphill battle, it's best for me to stay within the ranks of the Democratic Party for the moment until people get to know me better and then realize that, hey, you know, I can probably help you guys out on some issues that you might not be completely on board with the Democrats. Although most of the campaign planks or most of the planks of their platform, the Democratic Party, I agree with, but it's so hypocritical because they don't actually do anything to support those campaign or those not campaign but those platform planks. They do exactly the opposite of what they say they're doing, and this is what's so frustrating. You know, for the past 40 years, they've done everything they can to throw working people and small businesses under the bus, and do everything they can to support the military-industrial complex and Wall Street and Silicon Valley. And these are all people who have led us down the wrong road. The military-industrial complex getting us into wars that we don't need, Silicon Valley spying on us and taking all of our information to try to sell us more junk that we don't need, and Wall Street running the whole world economy into a ditch. These are not people that I like or want to support at all. They need to be very heavily regulated. But I also want to remind everybody that what they're doing is legal. So if we want to change the system, we have to elect people like myself and Tim Canova and others who are going to change the rules of the game so that they don't have such an undue influence on our system.
Absolutely.
Completely agree.
I'm just going to check really quickly and see if John was going to join us. So were there any, so aside from getting money out of politics, which I agree is one of the biggest, what else on CFAR is important? Or
well, maybe what you could do is outline a couple things that you guys are really interested in, and let me respond to what you have to say, because there's a lot of things on that document, and I'd like to focus on those things that you folks are most interested in.
Right. Let's see. Bryan, do you have it right in front of you? I guess Medicare for All is probably the one we hear the most of.
Okay, that's a perfect issue to start with, because this is something that most of our population wants, and this is what I want to see happen is we expand Medicare for all of our citizens. What we want, I'm not sure what SB 562, all the details of that program, but the Sacramento Bee described it as a program that was totally administered by the state, which I don't think is what most of us want. What we want, most of us who call ourselves progressive, is a system that is publicly financed and privately delivered. Nobody should ever have to change their provider. Just go to the doctor, you get the treatment that you need, and the government picks up the tab for it. That's what I'd like to see. I mean, I think that it could be actually pretty seamless. We just turn over the Social Security Administration, turns over every citizen's Social Security number to Medicare, and we wave our magic wand, and we hire a bunch of people that we need, because we're definitely going to need a lot of additional administrative help. And we just massively expand Medicare, and we open it up to all of our citizens. I think the numbers I've seen, that if we were to do this, it would cost each of us about $50 a month. I pay over $200 a month for my health insurance for myself and my partner. When I started out with Amtrak in 2008, it was a little over $100 a month, and now it's double. So I think that there was no provision within SB 562 in California to cap prescription Medicare or prescription drugs, And so that was a legitimate concern. But a lot of times these issues go to the floor for debate, and they're not thoroughly hashed out, which may, just to give Anthony Rendon a little bit of space on this, maybe there was some legitimacy to that claim, but I still find it very hard to believe that he would have held this bill up. He probably knew the details of this before they even brought it for approval, and he could have said, look, you got to straighten out these details and get a funding mechanism in place, or we don't have anything to talk about. And
he didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And then Anthony Villaraigosa, who's championed single-payer healthcare system, now is saying, oh, this is a farce, this is ridiculous, we can't afford this, there's no funding mechanism. That's absurd. California is, I don't know, what is it, the 6th or 7th largest economy in the world. There's no way that anybody can tell me we don't have the money to finance this. And no way anybody can tell me we don't have the money to do it on a national scale. So I'm very much in favor of this. If I'm elected, I will introduce a bill for expanding Medicare for all of our citizens with no loopholes. We'll straighten it all out before it ever goes to the floor for a vote, and we'll try to use every bit of leverage that we can to make that a reality. Our citizens want it, both Republicans and Democrats, and independents, Greens, Libertarians, we all want it, but our corrupt politicians will not deliver it because they're beholden to the healthcare industry. And this bill, this ACA Act, was written, to my knowledge, by the Heritage Foundation, and it's a gigantic giveaway to the healthcare industry. Obama went and campaigned against Dennis Kucinich for his opponent. Some people say because he didn't get on board with Obamacare. And they had both houses of Congress and the presidency. They could have passed single-payer health care or Medicare for all, and they failed to do it. Not because, as Thomas Frank has said, not because this just happened generically. It happened because that's what they wanted to happen.
Right.
So, I'm glad you mentioned him. I bring up his book, Listen Liberal, constantly. I think for anyone that's still confused, they just need to read his book and then they'll understand. But yeah, I do remember hearing, I believe it was on NPR right before the election, they were interviewing some people in the western part of the state in North Carolina, and I believe it was Yancey County, which went for Trump. It's a very red part of the state. But they were interviewing people and they were having to just drop their insurance because of the premiums going up so high. They just, they owned their own businesses and whatnot, auto repair shops and things like that. And they just couldn't pay the premiums. And, I know from our own personal experience, my husband worked with a startup tech company for a little while last year, and we were paying $1,400 a month. And I compared it, just out of curiosity, with what I could get through the Affordable Care Act, and it was identical. It would have been at $1,400 a month. So, I mean, that's just insane. And, we're at a point now where we can deal with it and absorb it. It's not fun, it's painful, but there are people that, or even us, 15 years or so ago, would have just had to go without. So it is ridiculous, and I think that we need to take the profit motive out of healthcare. It just doesn't make any sense.
Obama was a gigantic disappointment for millions of us.
Absolutely.
I really was rooting for him. I really wanted him to be successful. And at every turn, he seemed to support the status quo. He's a great-looking guy. He's just somebody that you'd like to be friends with. But really, at the end of the day, we don't want a friend as a president. We want somebody who's going to do the right thing. And here we thought we had another Franklin Roosevelt, and what we got is another George Bush.
Right.
Yes.
What's the saying that he left the grassroots on the White House lawn? Exactly.
That's
what
right.
I've heard.
And I think Thomas Frank said it perfectly when he said history dealt this man 4 aces, and he walked away with almost nothing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I was explaining that to my 13-year-old daughter today, and I was telling her about Flint and the water there and other problems that, he just left. And I think we can't ignore that. But I actually want to ask you about something, if you don't mind getting into it. It's not on the CFAR contract, but it's a tweet that you put out, and I think it's a very important topic right now. And it was about the judge in the Manafort case, Ellis, and what he had to say. And I just love, what you said. Next time it could be the establishment trying to get rid of someone like Bernie Sanders. To be careful what you wish for. Yep. And Bryan and I talk about this a lot, that the dangerous precedent set here with this whole narrative is exactly as you said. I mean, we can't just go. We're trying to remove an elected president, and that scares me. And I didn't vote for Trump, but I'm much more concerned about that and what's going on. I mean, we've had over a year and a half of investigation, and not seeing anything yet. I mean, if there is, okay, but I tend to, me personally, I think Glenn Greenwald put forth a pretty good case about we need the evidence before we push the narrative. So
absolutely.
It's a very touchy subject, but everyone's talking really about it. So
I am not a supporter of Donald Trump. I think he's a bully and kind of a thug. I really wish he hadn't been elected. However, the leadership of the Democratic Party is so hysterical that they lost this election that they'll do anything to run this man out of office. Yeah. And I do believe it's kind of a witch hunt. I don't believe he's done anything worse than anybody other politician has done. If they should be investigating anybody, they should be investigating the DNC and Hillary Clinton. Yes. And instead, what they're doing is trying to convince all of us that this guy is so horrible that we've got to get rid of him. I don't like a lot of the things that he said. They were very insensitive, very politically incorrect comments to say. But it's hard for me to say that everything that he has said is just racist. I think it's the news media just interpreting what he said as being racist when he's just being Donald Trump. He's a guy who's like a bull in a china cupboard and is not necessarily concerned with what the polling numbers are going to say. And I think this is why people voted for him, is because they thought, well, this is refreshing to have somebody actually come out and just say what's on their mind. And I certainly wouldn't come out and say, well, we got to ban all Muslims until we figure out what the hell's going on. That's insane to say something like that. But is that racist? I don't think that qualifies as racist. If you had come out and called somebody the N-word or whatever, okay, that's racist. But everything that they're bringing up is very dubious. And this, as you say, this sets a hugely bad example and precedent. If we can just drum this guy out of office because we don't like a few of the things that he said, when actually some of the things that he's proposing are fairly healthy. This Iran thing, I think a lot of, as I said earlier, I think a lot of what he said was probably right on the money, but I would have rather have given them a good deal or a bet that enhanced the deal that they already had, rather than just come out and say, oh, we're against this and we're shutting it down, and then start up the antagonistic relationship with them all over again. That's where I can't support him. When he's being tough on China, I can totally get behind that. The Chinese Communist Party has held a stranglehold on that country for 70 years. They're responsible for the deaths of 60 to 80 million people. They are consistently disappearing and murdering Falun Gong practitioners, Christians, and Uyghurs, and nobody's talking about it. However, our Congress in 2016 put out a resolution 343, House Resolution 343, saying that there was credible, significant evidence the Chinese government was complicit in the disappearance and murder of hundreds of thousands of these minority groups, and then selling their organs on the open market for a profit. I've actually met with a couple of these Falun Gong practitioners. A lady and her mom were sent to a re-education facility for 2 years, and they were forced to renounce their faith or their practice, and they were forced to do hard manual labor. And then somehow, by the grace of God, they were able to get out of this situation and get to the United States. But we're not holding their feet to the fire, yet we're holding the North Koreans' feet to the fire. It's interesting that the North Koreans don't do much trade with the United States, do they? But China does a huge amount of trade, so we're giving them a free ride. And I might add that Ms. Chu said nothing, the incumbent, Judy Chu, said nothing about that resolution, nor did she co-sponsor it, and has been silent on this issue since she's been in office. And I find that disqualifying.
I do remember hearing about the Falun Gong, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it was maybe around 2003 or so. Maybe I just happened to hear about it at that time. You know, I certainly don't ever want to deny that Trump has said some terribly awful racist things. I think he does try to appeal to his base. I just wanted to say that. But I think that, you know, the Democratic Party wants everyone to ignore the facts that Thomas Frank lays out in Listen Liberal, and they want to place the blame on Trump's racism and WikiLeaks and Russia and all this other stuff, instead of looking at how they turned their back on most of America, or the working middle class and working class people. And if you, I mean, we've also talked about this lots of times. There are several districts where they voted for Obama twice, and then it flipped to Trump. That's, you know, to borrow James Carville's term, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, it's pretty straight, pretty clear. And why these people voted for Trump, it was an anti-establishment vote. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Well, you know, and Russia poses no significant threat to us. When the Berlin Wall came down, and I think it was 1989, correct me if I'm wrong, they promised, the first George Bush administration promised that NATO would not move 1 inch.
Right.
And they've consistently violated that oath again and again and again. And this is why the Russians are nervous. You can listen to Ray McGovern, excuse me. He'll give you some very good information about the Russians. He's an expert. He's a guy that I think he started the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. He's got some very good information about that. And anything I want to know about Russia, he's the guy that I go to listen to. And I find that I don't really feel that China is a threat to us. I feel that morally we have to take a position and get them to stop this genocide of these people. I want to be friends with the Chinese. They have a wonderful history. They faced what they call the 100 years of humiliation at the hands of the Western powers, and we have to somehow atone for that and recognize that they have some righteous complaints about the way that they've been treated through the years. The Russians have been encircled by the Western powers since during the Crimean War and afterwards, and even before. We've always been trying to check Russia, and they have a right to exert their influence over the areas that are close to their borders, as we have a right to exert our influence close to the Mexican border. So there's a huge amount of hypocrisy that takes place with our foreign policy, and that's what I'd like to do something about. If I'm elected, I'd really like to be on one of those committees that has to do with our foreign policy.
Well, even the Manafort case, it came out that Tony Podesta's brother, had some link with that company that, actually, I'm going to get the details incorrect here, but had something to do with the company that Manafort was involved in. Do you remember the details?
Well, and William Casey flew to Tehran and made a private agreement to get them to hold on to the hostages until Ronald Reagan took office. I mean, if that's not some sort of collusion or corruption or violation of, I can't remember the name of that act, the Brown Act or one of those, that's probably a violation, but they got off the hook on that. So these sorts of things I am not very interested in. as far as prosecuting people for that, because this is what candidates do when they get into office. I feel kind of like it's okay to make a deal. If we get elected, this is the deal that we'll present to you. I don't find that to be corrupt. I find that to be candidates doing what they feel is in the interest of their particular platform. As long as they don't do anything that is really outrageous, I can kind of overlook some of that. So I got to be careful. I don't want to step into a minefield here, but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Right.
Is candidates do these sorts of things. Their campaign committees do these sorts of things to make sure they have some sort of certainty going into office if they're elected. And I'm kind of okay with some of this. And I think as that judge said, they're not interested in whatever he did with so-called bank fraud. They're interested in digging up dirt on Mr. Trump, so they can try to find a way to impeach him. And that's very dubious, and I don't want to go down that road with our country.
Right, and there's so many other issues that could be, getting the focus now instead of this. And I think most regular people just want the politicians to represent them. And so that's kind of what we've been trying to do with working with CFAR. These kinds of panels aren't going to be on CNN or MSNBC. And we know that, candidates like you that are great and really want to represent the people aren't going to get that coverage on the news. So it's kind of why we started doing this. And it's been really great to talk to lots of great candidates. And we hope, is it June 5th is your primary, right?
June 5th is our primary in California.
Okay.
So I really love doing these. I've done a few of these since I've started running. And I listen to Jimmy Dore quite a bit, and I really appreciate the fact that he's highlighting issues that don't get covered on MSNBC or CNN. And here, I'm getting my news from a comedian. This shows you how far we've run off the rails in our country. And that's not to disparage Jimmy at all. He's a very smart guy, and I love his show. But if a comedian has to step up to the plate and do the job of what our journalists used to do,
right,
then we've really got problems. So we still have people like Glenn Greenwald and Thomas Frank and others, Chris Hedges, who are doing really great work. But ever since Ronald Reagan did away with the fairness doctrine with the FCC, we've had our news organizations blended in with the entertainment sections with these conglomerates, and they need to get back to the fairness doctrine where the news has to be absolutely separated from the money-making operation of the broadcaster. And I think that a broadcaster's FCC license should be contingent upon them providing free forum for candidates during an election. There's a lot of things we could talk about with elections, but I can leave that for another time.
Yeah, we're actually, I believe we'll be doing an election integrity panel next Tuesday. I think we have half the participants committed to it so far. But I agree with you completely. I think the Real News Network does a good job covering the news.
Wonderful.
Max Blumenthal is one of my favorites. But yeah, it seems like the comedians are now, I guess it's always the court jesters tell the truth. But Jimmy Dore and Lee Camp, of course, that's on RT America. So if you're scared of that, and Randy Credico also been doing all those radio interviews. So it is kind of ironic that we're getting our news from comedians, but they're doing the legwork and they're interviewing a lot of the journalists that are actually on the ground. Who was Jimmy Dore had a woman on, I think her last name is Cortez. She was actually in Syria. Did anybody catch that?
Yeah, I think I caught a little of that.
Yeah,
okay,
so I mean, it's not, he's just pulling it out of thin air. They're actually talking to people that have the real information. So, Yeah, and I always, when I mention Lee Camp, I remind people, that Larry King is there and Ed Schultz and
Right.
On RT and RT America. And, Ed Schultz came out just about a month ago and said how he was told by MSNBC to not cover Bernie's campaign. So
I saw that clip.
yeah.
That was very telling.
Mm-hmm.
How they operate with these media conglomerate
Right.
companies. They all work in lockstep, and
Mm-hmm.
I think they coordinate their efforts. The leadership of both parties
Mm-hmm.
and corporate America, they all are basically one entity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to shut down here, and we can.
Right.
It's just
Right.
that we need to have more people like myself and Tim Canova and Steve Jaffe,
Mm-hmm.
Randy Bryce, who I hope doesn't get sold out to the Democratic Party because he's accepting money from the DCC, from the CCC, from what I hear. But at any rate, at least he's going up against the establishment. That's a positive step.
Mm-hmm.
But we really need people who are going to say, you know what, I'm going to come out and tell the truth no matter what
Right.
happens. I don't crave this office. I can think of a lot of things I'd rather be doing than running for Congress.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see anybody else stepping up to the plate in our
Mm-hmm.
district. And I feel like what we need to do not only is to challenge these Republicans, we need to challenge the establishment Democrats who are actually part of the problem.
Right.
Judy Chu accepted tens of thousands of dollars from Amerisource and McKesson, two of the biggest culprits in the opioid crisis, of pumping very suspicious quantities of opioids into these pain management clinics throughout the country, making tens of millions of dollars, maybe even billions of dollars from this. So to me, like, her vote is very cheap. I think it was something like $30,000 she accepted, so it didn't take much for her to do that. And then she has the gall to lead a panel on opioid addiction here in our district, which I felt was the pinnacle of hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm. Well, thankfully, people can now look things up themselves. It's pretty easy to find out this information, and we have a very engaged, population now, especially millennials, people a bit younger than us, are very engaged and paying attention. And I think also, the CFAR candidates that we've signed on, I think they really kind of, even though we do have more Democrats than other parties, they do kind of cut across party lines, because they're all candidates that are focusing on the issues and not the divide, the issues that we do have in common, that people all have in common, that they want to see fixed. So I think.
Well, and this is one thing, sort of a beef that I have against Judy Chu. I don't want to really make this a campaign against her, but she seems to latch on to all of these identity politics issues, and I feel like that's what separates us.
Yeah.
I'm a gay guy who's married to an immigrant, and I don't choose to make that a focus of my campaign. Nobody should even care about my own personal life.
Right.
But to constantly make an issue of these identity politics issues, I think it's very counterproductive. And what we need to do is find ways to get along with each other. Ralph Nader wrote this great book about, now I can't remember the name, it's here on my shelf, but it's a book about cooperating with the opposite party. And it's one of his most recent books. You can Google it. Just don't have the title on the tip of my tongue. But that's really what I would like to focus on is, hey, let's find a way for all of us to work together and get some good, positive progress happening. There's things that I can agree with the Republicans on, and many things that I can agree with my progressive friends. So I'd rather not focus on those things that we disagree on. I'd like to focus on the things that we agree on, and let's make some good progress.
Right. And with almost nearly half the country is independent now, or doesn't want to be affiliated with either party. They're focusing on the issues, I think, more, and people are tired of that.
This is what our people want. They want our elected representatives to find ways to cooperate with the opposition and make positive impact on our society. You know, Franklin Roosevelt, he says that his greatest achievement was saving capitalism, and I wish they would have gone farther. But as Thomas Frank has told us, I mean, he was like the sort of compromise candidate. I mean, we came very close in our country to having a revolution when we had the Depression. And had they not taken the dramatic action that they did with the New Deal, things could have turned out quite a bit different. And so I think if we don't do that here in the United States, we could have something quite a bit different than a political revolution. And none of us want to see that happen here.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for coming on. I'm sorry, John Lancelot messaged and said he wouldn't be able to make it. He got caught up with work. So we'll do another panel another time and maybe include him, and we could talk more foreign policy stuff or whatever you like.
Yeah, so, absolutely. I really enjoy these back and forths here and the questions. I love answering questions from the audience because oftentimes, you know, it kind of gets me off of my scripted, you know, answers, which I have a tendency to say over and over again, which is what you have to do as a person running for office. But I love getting the unscripted or the unplanned for questions, because then you really get to the bottom of somebody's authenticity and what they really believe in. So, yeah, thank you very much for giving me the forum to speak to you tonight.
Yes, Bryan, did you want to say something about the town?
Just a quick announcement. Tomorrow we're going to have on Bill Sombrello. We'll be doing a town hall with him. So for those that are joining us tomorrow night for that.
And actually, I believe we're doing one for Lisa McCormick again on Thursday. So this is another option we probably should have mentioned to you before. So we've been hosting these where we can send out the Zoom link that we sent to you. You could post it on your own Facebook page, and people could just join and ask questions directly. So it wouldn't even just be a couple of us.
Wonderful. That'd be great. Actually, so the link that you just sent me tonight, I could just push that out on Facebook.
Well, it's a new one each time. I have to generate a new meeting.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely. And you could you could announce it a week ahead of time and say, whatever, this night at this time. And here's the link, and come on and ask questions. We tend to, if it gets any more than about 10 people, it's really hard to, get the questions But yeah, up to about 10, I think works. And we'll just kind of hang in the background or even off camera, and you can just take questions directly.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, just keep me posted, and I'd love to participate.
Okay, great. Thank you. Really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
good night, and have a nice evening.
You too. Good night.
All right, bye-bye.